It sounds like we're live. Since this isn't a formal meeting, or Dan, are you and Bear going to lead us off, or
We are right now, we're going to, and right now we should be live on YouTube. So we want to make sure we were getting that part done.
It sounds like we're live. Since this isn't a formal meeting, or Dan, are you and Bear going to lead us off, or
we are right now, we're going to, and right now we should be live on YouTube. So we want to make sure we were getting that part.
Deja vu all over again.
It sounds like we're live. Since this isn't a formal. I'm afraid to say anything at this point.
So
This won't be distracting at all.
no, not at all. I think I resolved the issue by closing. I think it automatically opened a YouTube window for streaming. So I think we were hearing that. So I think we fixed it. Sorry for that. This is actually our first time doing this ourselves. Robert has taken off our training wheels, and we are. I think we were successful. So yeah, we'll kick it off. Welcome to our workshop of January 21st, 2021, for the Planning and Zoning Commission. And our only purpose for this workshop is to go through comments for our Land Development Code Update Module 2. And after we go through that, we could probably do a little bit of housekeeping at the end to kind of remind people about what we have coming up. We will have, well, let's just do a little housekeeping now. We will have our regularly scheduled Planning and Zoning meeting the first Thursday in February here at City Hall, where we will be hearing about a plan development amendment will be on the agenda. So that packet will be coming out shortly with information on that and agenda. At that time, we will also having to have elections for a chair and vice chair. Is that correct, Dan?
Yeah. So it'll be the first meeting of the year that you guys can actually vote on something. So you'll approve minutes, you'll elect a chair and vice chair, and then we have that community meeting. So it's not one that you are making a recommendation on, it's just a community meeting.
That's right.
Is the meeting on February 4th at 6:30 or 5:30?
6 p.m. I think we decided.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I think you're right. We're moving to 6 p.m.
Okay.
So, and if P&Z would like to, we can pick up where we leave off tonight and do more workshop after that public hearing or public meeting, if you guys want to, since we'll already have everybody here and mic'd up and everything.
So I think that's all we want to make sure we mention. Sorry, Matt?
I said everybody sounded excited about that option.
Yeah, dead silence. Right?
Well, if you choose to do so, let us know, because we need to put it on the agenda.
Well, how big is the agenda item? Like, is it, what's the amendment?
It's one community meeting, public hearing. So it's for a proposed apartment complex out of Maitland West. This is really basically their chance to kind of sell you guys a project, let you know, get some feedback from you and the public before it goes through the ringer and comes back to you later.
I would say, if I'd suggest, put it on the agenda, and then we can do some volume of it depending on how long that one event goes.
Okay, that sounds good. We can do that. All right, without further ado, we can get started. As I'm sure you saw, Article 5, the development standards. And this is a kind of in module 1, the way I think about it is that's kind of the where and the what of, development for our city, land development. And this is the how. I mean, this is really describes, gets into kind of the technical details of how people have to develop when they, and redevelop when they choose to do so. Some of it gets fairly technical. So as we go through these, a lot of them are based on, some of these standards are based on engineering standards. From an organization standpoint, this is a big deal, is taking a lot of these different standards that right now are scattered throughout our Maitland City Code and consolidate them into one article so they're all in one place. I mean, that in and of itself is a big undertaking. Just having it all in one place. So you can just go and look through all the different subsections 1 through 15 and kind of have a good sense of how to guide your development, or how that'll be really useful both for staff when we're reviewing it and for the development community. So thank you to everybody for reviewing this, and especially those who sent in your comments. Everybody probably got that. We can be like last time, I'll kind of facilitate a discussion. Not everybody was able to get written comments in, so kind of as we go through the document page by page, speak up and raise your hand if you have a comment that's not on this list, and we will certainly address it. I'll start screen sharing, and as we discuss these comments, I'll be adding them to this document, right? Kind of like last time for module 1. So we'll end up with a PDF with a bunch of sticky notes on it that will represent the comments from the Planning and Zoning Commission. And then again, process-wise, at the end of all this, you will have all the reviews, all the modules will have a formal vote at a public hearing to formally adopt all these comments and transmit them to Clarion and staff for implementation.
Hey, Barrett, regarding that, and maybe we're all saying the same thing, but I just want to kind of make sure that we're clarified on that. So, because again, it's still, and maybe it was just the fact that it's been, a month or so since I've looked at this document, but and now we're looking at different stuff. It continues to be a challenge, and I'm not saying that I don't know that there's a different way that we can do this phase. I think the overall thing is an iterative process in reviewing this document, and I think we've realized and appreciated that. But I really think, and I can't remember what we had allocated in the schedule, but I think when we get all of this back together, when we get this all together in one big giant document at the end, that has incorporated it's probably going to require another kind of review to kind of see how it all fits together, right? Because I still don't have a feel for that.
Sure. I think that's fair, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I also think from a process standpoint, there's still going to be 1 or 2 more articles coming. We call module 2.5. It's kind of the last bit of it, which will include a few bits and pieces. Then they'll implement all the changes and then have one document which will go to City Council. Then but before final implementation, before City Council adopts that, we're going to go through a pretty rigorous, what we've identified in our scope as task 4, which is the testing phase. And we have yet to really define P&Z's role in the testing phase, and I think you all can be as involved in it as you wish. And what the testing phase will do is, when we've got this document, we're going to have hypothetical developments on actual parcels in Maitland and redevelopments, and we will be testing, trying to break the code. Like, okay, when we apply the code to these hypothetical new developments, are we getting the outcomes that we want? That's when we'll apply in the parking standards, for example. All right, so we've got a bank, and this bank with these setbacks and this build 2 lines in downtown or on the west side, or in the corridor district, this is how we're telling them they have to develop. And we'll be able to visualize that. We actually have money in the budget to do mock-ups. So we'll be able to actually see, what a 2-story, with an FAR building with an FAR of 1 is going to look like, with the required parking, with the required setbacks, with all the landscaping, with the buffers. And you look at it and say, hold on, we're making them do that. Like, we don't want to do that. Or vice versa, or say, you know what, that is too much parking, or too little parking, or that doesn't, etc. All of that. Or we're going to be trying to rigorous testing of this. So I think that is.
So is that phase, that phase is prior to it going to City Council for adoption, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will there be
the task 5 is the public hearing adoption process. There's going to be a workshop, and then there'll be a workshop where we see it all together, and then there's going to be testing, And then there's going to be adoption.
And what is the public's role or potential role during that workshop and the testing? Have been defined, or is
Public role. I don't know that we've fully defined that yet.
okay? All right.
Yeah, the workshop will be open to the public. It may or may not be well, they'll have that potential for input. They'll have the P and Z meeting that this final recommendation will be a public hearing, and they'll have the 2 council public hearings.
Okay.
I want to say we had another public workshop built in. I don't.
There's definitely a joint workshop when Clarion will either be on site or participating via Zoom, where it'll be a joint workshop between the city council and P&Z. And yeah, we'll have to think more about the public's role in that. But that's still, just to be clear, that's coming up. I think that's important when we consider a lot of this stuff, is that from staff's perspective too, we are kind of in the same boat. We're not, we're going to want to see how this all works in practice, hypothetical practice at least, before we go ahead and adopt it.
Got it. Okay, great.
Yeah, great question. Any other thoughts or observations or anything, comments for the good of the group before we get started? All right, hearing none. Overall, great group, really insightful group of comments, I thought, and I'm excited, looking forward to this discussion. The first one was on page 5.1, comment 1. I think it worked well before, when we'll just have the person who made the comment kind of read it and introduce it, and then discussion can go from there. So Matt, you do the honors.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me get into my PDF to make sure I'm looking at it in the context in which I commented.
Sure.
Okay, so this is to the.
I forgot my copy of the CDP in my office, but I read it earlier today, so I hope I can remember.
Right. So I guess
It's about the footnote, right?
it's about the footnote. Yeah, exactly. And I guess I'm missing on the standard. Hold on a second. Let me get to it. 1.4.1.2.
Well, while he's looking, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Under the purpose, under I and J, it says reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve air quality.
Mhm.
Is that a problem in Maitland? Or is that just a generic conversation piece? Because I mean, if this is supposed to be about Maitland, that's why I'm just asking out of curiosity. I'm trying to figure out why.
Yeah, I mean, I think
aspirational.
The reducing vehicle miles traveled is a part of this, and I think that does have the impacts of improving air quality and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, right? Making it possible to have trips without it not an automobile.
And we'll have to double check, but I believe those were some of the things that were outlined in the sustainability action plan the council adopted.
And Matt, I don't know if it helps. I'm not sure. Perhaps you were looking at a different section, because 1.4.1.2, I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, but I think that said that when you have new developments, we're going to ask them to connect to like the bike ped master plan and make like transportation connections.
Yeah, I'm reading it. I'm reading standard 1.4.1.2 as part of the mobility component of the comprehensive development plan. Am I?
The mobility element. Yep.
The mobility element. Yeah, the mobility element. I'm sorry. Yeah, that was.
Yep.
So it says, continue to review development regulations and make necessary adjustments so that transit options are adequately considered. Transit facility requirements such as the provision of transit plans and transit stops at major developments, incentives, and the clustering and mixing of land uses shall be incorporated into development regulations. I guess my question is this footnote stating that this is basically implementing that component of the mobility element standard?
This, yeah, this footnote. So certain, yes, the multimodal requirements of it, in that within this section, we're going to require new developments to have transit stops when appropriate. I think that's all it's saying. The footnote's not going to be a part of the code, right? This is for informational purposes. And I think that's what it's saying.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, I think basically that remember it's a bit semantics, but you know, it says the development regulations, and these are the development regulations, right, that we're implementing. So that's how it's implemented by, while we're reviewing these development regs, we're putting in requirements that they address multimodal transportation, ride share, you know, bus, train, etc.
Right. Okay. Yeah, let's keep going on. I think, as I recall, there were a couple of comments that maybe were addressed a little bit later in the document, and that'll be kind of covered as we go through. So I just read this in a linear fashion. I didn't go back and forth on a lot of it, but
okay. Can everybody see the LDC now? My screen sharing, you guys see that document? All right. Oh, also welcome, Harris. How are you?
Oh, thank you. I'm doing well. Had some childcare stuff to get situated, but I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the welcome.
Excellent. All right. So comment 2. Matt, that's yours as well.
So comment 2, hold on a second. This is, so the measure is, it says that if the expansion increases the building's floor area by 50% or more. So I guess my question is that if it were a change in, it says an expansion or alteration of the development that existed on the date shall comply with the standards of this section. If the expansion increases the building's floor area by 50% or more, or the alteration involves 50% or more of the building's gross floor area. I guess my question is that really the measure that we should be used is in terms of the expansion of the floor area? What would there be other situations that might change the use of the development, and that would also have an impact that we would want to take into consideration of its applicability?
So you're talking about the changing of the use?
Yeah.
Yeah, if the change of use, if they're changing the use, then it would be looked at if it triggers the impacts. The reason that it's 50% here is that's kind of a common one that's found throughout the code, 50%, because we're trying to strike a balance between not disincentivizing reinvestment into some properties by punishing them if they do a really low threshold, but also not letting them do the majority of it and then get away with them not having to bring stuff up to code. So I think that's kind of where that 50 came up with. If that's, P&Z thinks that it should be lower, then absolutely it's something that we can recommend.
The current code uses this percentage and also a dollar figure, and staff has really wanted to get away from that. It's been really problematic to try to calculate. So it's different, but we tried to have this applicability. This applicability language is used throughout the code, not just for the mobility and connectivity standards, but almost everywhere that new standards are applied.
Right. And so forgive me for maybe my ignorance, but if it's an existing development and you're changing the use, then that would by definition, would that require its applicability of utilizing the new code?
Well, this deals with multimodal access and circulation systems and cross access and
Yeah, I
like
understand
that.
that.
So I don't believe a change in use would. Because a change in use is dealt with for parking, but not in 5.2, but not in 5.1. I do not think a change in use would trigger this.
But could it not? And again, maybe I'm just, kind of being too particular, but could a change of use not have an impact in the way that access and connectivity might exist within a particular piece of land?
A change of use using the existing building.
Yeah.
It could, it definitely could, and we probably need to look at that on a site basis because a lot of times the building is set in its place. And as you may recall, the Maitland Market changed its use, but the site was already built, so there was limited amount of stuff we could do with cross access or things like that. Certainly, if you have multi-use where you have tenants move in and out where the use changes, the impact's probably de minimis, but there could be some instances where a whole different occupancy category could trigger a much higher threshold, and it may. We have to look into that. That's a good statement, and then what that threshold would be if it's, in a case like traffic, you get vested for what you had, and you're only assessed at what's above and beyond trips you're generating. So we have to look at the right way to measure it, and when it trips certain part of these mobility things like putting in sidewalks or
Right. Yeah.
things like that.
Exactly. And that was, I think it's a question we can ask Clarion, right? I mean, again, I get the idea that this would be one measure, but I guess my question was, is this maybe really the only measure of increase that should be utilized is what I was is really more where my question should have been, or my comment should have been. But anyways,
and you're more worried about change in occupancy classification versus the use, or are you looking at just the use as well?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, no, that's a good point. I mean, like it's like it goes from a bank to a market, but in Maitland Market's case, I think they did trigger that they altered more than 50% of the building's gross floor area. So that triggered it regardless. But if they didn't, in a hypothetical situation where they used the existing building, they didn't redevelop it or redevelop it less than 50%, should that change in use require them to do like some of these site improvements, I guess. So yeah, that's
and that maybe, again, not to belabor it, right? But maybe if that is the case, then that would be applicable to the alteration involving 50% or more of the building's gross floor area. So maybe that kind of solves itself in that capacity.
And oftentimes, right? Because if it's going from oftentimes if it is a big change in use, they're going to have to change the building, right? And then that's what we're trying to capture. But I think it's we'll leave it as a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, Matt, you're kind of right that if it's a big change in use, they're going to do a lot of alteration, at least interior alteration.
Yeah, and maybe I didn't quite catch that. My comment was really more about the first part, but maybe I may have answered my own question, but I think it's still a valid, maybe something to have Clarion at least respond.
But there may be some instances where it's not. You have a big box or like a big gym that wants to come in and put a commercial space in there afterwards. The commercial will likely generate more than a gym would. And at what point does that trigger?
And my thought around this, guys, is that it could just be some sort of an additional kind of, I don't want to call it a catch-all, but some additional measure or additional perspective that could kind of cover us if and when, I'm not trying to define every one of these things that it could be, but some additional kind of parameter that would be applicable or that could require some changes to be made if in fact it were, applicable at some point in the future. So.
Absolutely. And then there's a challenge with this applicability stuff that we've talked about throughout the code is, and I think Dan touched on this, you don't want to disincentivize redevelopment. right?
Oh.
And if somebody comes in and you have a vacant building and somebody comes in and is like, oh, I want to do this cool thing. You're like, well, guess what? Now you're redesigning the whole parking lot and you know, and bury undergrounding power lines and they're gonna be like, nah, I'm gonna do a greenfield development somewhere else, you know.
Right.
That's the balance.
But we can absolutely look at a threshold.
Yeah.
You know, we can come up with something that if you have a change in occupancy classification that generates X amount of more traffic than the previous, then maybe that triggers some of the threshold.
Okay.
I know there's some ordinances out there that do that,
Got it.
and they usually base it on, for instance, if you're changing the use or changing the occupancy type and you have a net increase in traffic of 100 average daily trips or 100 peak hour trips, then it starts triggering a bunch of other stuff.
Right. Okay.
Is that kind of along the lines of what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, moving on. If anybody else has any other comments that aren't on the written list, you know, jump in anytime when it's appropriate. If you see that we're coming to that page, but still on page 5.2, Glenn, you're up next.
I think this for me was just a little bit of point of clarity. And if I brought it up, maybe you guys can just sort of articulate, but I was slightly thrown off by the developer. The developer had to provide on the development we get, but off the site as required. And I just was questioning, is that worded properly and or possible?
Generally, so depending on the scope of the development, they will have to do a traffic memo or a traffic study, and that traffic study may outline some offsite improvements, some improvements to intersection, you know, half a mile away or a quarter mile away, or adding a lane of traffic, or you know, turn lane or something like that. So in that case, that's an offsite improvement that we'd require, but it would be triggered by the traffic study recommendations in that case.
So is that, and is this appropriate? Is that the last one ends the rotten egg? Or are they, you know, using your example, hey, they do a development and all of a sudden there has to be something down at the intersection that's corrected. And does that mean they bear the brunt of 100% of that expense, or is it whatever percentage? How does that factor in?
It can be done in different ways depending on how it's laid out. You can do it in a developer's agreement where if you trigger a much higher water and sewer generation rate, and you have to bring in higher size pipes or something like that, it can be done in a cost share if others are benefiting from it. Oftentimes, in my experience, it really is the last person in that triggers it. But in a case like the Enzion, when they originally came in a couple years ago to try to expand, their traffic study triggered some intersection improvements and some road improvements that were off-site that they were willing to do. Of course, they withdrew the application in the end, but you'll see cases like that.
Right, but using Enzion, which wasn't a very large development, just as an example, that maybe that would just kill them. All of a sudden, they can't do some of the things that you required. So you just said cost sharing. And this is all negotiable, I take it?
It gets real tricky because from back when the state had concurrency, it really was kind of the last person in the door tripped it, because if it wasn't for that development, the road wouldn't be failing and you wouldn't have to do that improvement. And yes, everybody up until then kind of added to that, but that's the way development was treated back in the concurrency days.
So that's then my question is, if that's the way it used to be and that's the way it was in concurrency days, is it appropriately written here or expected?
I think it is. I mean, I don't think this is going to be a surprise to any developers, because anywhere they go, they're going to, depending on the size of their project, they're going to have to do some improvements, which may be off-site. In some cases in the downtown, they can get some credits for it. If it's part of the DICE program, they can get some density bonuses for it or something like that if they do some offsite improvements. But that's a little bit different from a development triggering stuff. There's not a whole lot of offsite improvements other than maybe intersection improvements or turn lanes or something like that that you generally see. Rare cases you have water and sewer impacts or something like that, but most offsite improvements are generally
What about like
roadway.
what about sidewalks, Dan? Like, for example, if they might have to expand the sidewalks if they're not up to the current standards, they might have to, even if they're in the right of way, right? That would be considered an off-site improvement.
Yeah, it's an offsite improvement, but you usually only have to do that along your property frontage.
But you're right, it's only along your property frontage, but it's still considered an off-site improvement for access and circulation because it's in the public right of way, right? But the developer's still responsible for it.
Right.
Yeah. All right. We can move on. I put it on the table, and if everybody gets it, I'm good.
Well, Glenn, actually, I had where, it says shall dedicate any required rights of ways or easements. And I wondered if that was too broad. So I'm glad you brought it up because I was wondering, how can that impact the project?
Yeah. Anybody else, any other commissioners want to chime in too? Like I said, yeah, that's want this to be a.
Well, this came up in the, the Jim Lake project where there was debate around the sidewalks that went around the lake versus the bike trail along the tracks, right? So to Kathleen's comment, is that
I think in this case, we have to keep it broad because we don't know until the development comes in what we may need. We may need additional right-of-way for the roads if we have a substandard right-of-way, or we may need, in a case where you'll have a sidewalk that will be partly within the right-of-way and then it'll meander onto private property and then come back into the right-of-way. We need easement so the public have a right to use that sidewalk, whether it's gone onto the private property or not. So a lot of times we don't know that until the development comes in, but there's a lot of them. The Gem Lake, their access road goes over a piece of land that is owned by the city. We had to get a right of way, we had to get an easement to allow us to get back to the property for service of vehicles. They had to get an easement rights to go over our property so they can use that road. So a lot of times the easements don't pop up until we get into the site plan review or the development plan to see what all is needed and what easements are in place. A lot of times you'll have utility easements as well.
This is also a general
alternative. If you don't write it this way, then it's like, you don't have a conversation because now if you don't write it this way, it's basically putting all these offsite things on the city.
Right.
Another thing to consider when an operation expands or is new, they're going to incur impact fees and have to pay impact fees. And some of these offsite credits can count towards the payment in lieu of those impact fees. So in some ways, we have methods of being able to capture these improvements and not make a double whammy cost to them, and still while benefiting the project and the city at the same time.
okay? I'm good.
All right, still on page 5.2. Matt, you want to go next with comment number 4?
Yeah, so my comment was somewhat related to what Glenn's comment was, and I kind of read that very similar to the way Glenn did. It just seemed like and I get the fact that we don't know. It has to have some broad perspective, but my comment as it relates to here is there, do we have a plan, or do we have a plan to have a plan that developers might be able to refer to in order to understand what offsite improvements might be planned or desired, so that if they're coming in, they might have a better idea of what they're kind of getting into. And again, my kind of thought is it would also help us to substantiate what we might be asking for if a developer comes in a certain area. So I was
Yeah,
just really more a question for you guys. If there's any-
absolutely, and it relates to, I think, comment number 9 too, which was about what that plan is for bikes and pedestrians. We published the bike pedestrian master plan, and that
Right.
does outline, all the multi-use paths that we're planning. And as those developments come along, we're going to be trying to complete those as they come up. This also applies to subdivisions, right? So if somebody comes in, our street network's pretty much in place, I would venture to say. But if somebody comes in with a subdivision and puts in a bunch of new residential lots, there's going to be a road network associated with that. So that's going to be
on their site, But my question is, and so, yeah, we've got a bike ped master plan that talks about multi-use paths, but okay, I mean, what about sidewalks? Do we have sidewalks everywhere we want in the city?
We do. The bike master plan actually has a sidewalk master plan. It has the future proposed sidewalks and bikeways and multi-use paths. In the example of what
Was it?
brought up
Okay.
at Young Lake, there was a piece of bike path that the Adeline stopped at their property, and then we wanted Bella's property to continue it. There's a piece that was offsite that connected those two paths that was part of the bike ped master plan.
Okay.
So that was an
Okay.
offsite improvement.
All right. So yeah, that's good. I guess that, this could be, and again, not to kind of get it out of whack. I realize we're talking about kind of circulation and mobility here, so it's limited to certain things, but I get it's a heck of a lot easier said than done. So that should we make do we make reference to that here?
Well, I think we keep it general into our adopted plan. So we have a bike ped master plan. We have a parks recreation
right.
master plan. We have a CIP that outlines future projects. So
Okay,
all of those things that if it triggers one of those improvements, then
good point. Okay.
all right. All still in your court, Matt, for comment number 5.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those ones, guys, that maybe it's answered on down the way that my question was, or my comment is related to, what is that? 5.1.4.
And I think it's C. I think your comment, if I may jump ahead, I think it
Yeah,
is.
I think C kind of addresses it. So yeah. So shall is the preference unless it's modified based on, determination that it could be impractical or undesirable due to blah, blah, blah. So, okay. I'm good with removing that.
All right.
But Matt, my thing is how is that enforceable unless both property owners agree?
For the cross access easement.
Yeah, you can't burden a small development if they don't have, if the property owners, I mean, how can you force property owners?
Then it would have to be, then it could be determined that it's impractical or whatever, right?
correct. And what you can do is you can stub out and at least provide the connectivity. In the case of Walgreens, that was one that we never really stubbed out. Had we stubbed it out when the other one comes in for redevelopment, we've already got the stub there. We just make the connection and make it happen. But you'll see that, we've got MCN coming in, we've got more coming out in Maitland West. Those are ones that we can capture now as they're underdeveloped and make sure that they do cross each other. You got several parcels on MCN and we want cross access. So you're diluting the amount of traffic in one area by separating it out a little bit.
I know, but if the other property owner doesn't agree to it, how do you force them to do that?
Well, in case of MCN, you stub it out when one of the lots is developed, and when the other one comes in, then the stub's already there, so you make them connect to that stub.
But you're right, you can't force, if it's an already existing development and they don't want to do it, you can only do half of the connection.
Correct. And then when in the event in the future, when they come in and redevelop it, then you got the stub there.
All right. Keith, number 6, I think that's a good comment. We'll make sure that DRC is defined.
Yeah, I didn't dig all the way back to the front, but just making sure somewhere upstream.
You know, it probably should be defined, spelled out for the first time in each article. So good catch. Matt, comment number 7. I'm surprised that the transportation engineer has a lot of comments on the mobility section. So that's a good.
Sorry about that. I got a little overboard.
We're grateful for
It's
that.
your area of expertise.
That's right. So you want labels?
I think this graphic, and you guys are probably already on it. I just think this graphic could benefit from some labels.
So for example, showing where the street, so like here, this is not clear. This is cross access easement.
Yeah, right. But like up at the top, and maybe even to your point, you know, it might be helpful that, you know, like you've got up at the top where you've got a cross access stubbed out to a property line. There's not showing any other cross access there. You know, it might be that, you know, that you would have that in one of these parcels in between. So I don't have a way to point, but the red dot that's on the farthest left,
This one.
red circle rather, right? You might show one where it doesn't show the access, but a new like what's the new development? Are all of these new developments? You know, what's new, what's existing, what's a public street, what's a private driveway? I don't know.
So you want us to show like that far left one being vacant and having the middle one stubbing to it?
Maybe. I mean, that would help to, again, we talked about having the graphics help us to explain what the intent and the requirements of the written word are. I just think that this graphic could benefit greatly from some of that stuff.
That's a good point.
Spell. It's not right, I guess it is. Okay. Keith, comment 8.
Yeah, so this one has I just wanted to clarify that this was what I intended, that in on page 5-4, 2C, it says the community development director may waive or modify the requirements. So that's under the pedestrian cross access. If you go back to 5-3 under B1C, it basically says the development review committee may waive. Is that intentional that the committee does one and the director does another?
Yes, yeah, when staff went through this article with Public Works and the other departments and went through all this, there's certain ones that we're comfortable making on our own because it's really our area that really involves us more than others. And then there's other areas that we want the whole DRC to weigh in because it does really cross paths with multiple departments and it affects multiple things that maybe engineering standards need to look at that I don't have the expertise on and vice versa.
Okay.
Nine, I think, Keith, that's the bike ped master plan document, and we don't have that online yet.
Okay, so what I found wasn't what you were referencing.
Right. No, that wasn't it. We had a big old document that council approved a year and a half ago, I think. And
How does that, how and when does that get out for public viewing?
When we can make it ADA accessible. There's copies in the office. We used to have copies on the website, but we had to pull it off because it wasn't ADA accessible. So we have to go in and modify the entire PDF document.
And do we have plans on adding that to the GIS?
There will be, you're right, Harris, there will be layers in the GIS. The GIS is still being worked on to getting it up on the website, so it'll be accessible.
So do we see that document ready when this officially goes out?
It's already ready. It's been adopted. In fact, if that's something that the commission's interested in, that's something we can put on the FTP site and send you guys a link so you guys can see that document. That was adopted by city council in 2019.
Mhm.
It's more me going, I can't find it. And so somebody that's trying to,
Oh, that you can't, it's not that you can't find it. It's not publicly available online. They have to request it from our office, send an email, and we send it to them. So
I would like a copy if you could put it up for us, on our site.
yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting document. We do get people asking about it sometimes. We get the community bike activists that want to know in their neighborhood, what the thoughts are for connectivity and stuff. So yeah, I'll definitely put that on the FTP site.
how does somebody know that they have to go through and request that?
We get questions, but we get weird questions all the time. So they just contact our office and just ask, and they don't even necessarily know the existence of a plan, but they just ask, hey, when are we going to connect? What bike paths are the city or pedestrian pathways are the city working on? And then we give them that.
Or in the case of Dan Bellows, when we say you need to put a bike path in there because it's in the master plan, he says, well, can I get a copy of that? So
It's not ideal. I mean, like Harris said, ideally we'd have, like we had it on the website until we had to make everything, like we've heard time and time again, it sounds like a terrible excuse, but cities were getting sued for having inaccessible PDFs, and that planning documents are the worst because they've got tables and maps, all of which are very labor intensive to render ADA compliant. So you have to put descriptions of all those things on there. So we just haven't gotten those documents remediated to the point where we can post them on.
Okay.
But for sure, I'll send out the link. I'll post that to the FTP site and send out the link. All right, Matt, number 10.
So the statement in the document says all development shall provide streets laid out in accordance with appendix, whatever. But not all developments are going to require streets, right?
Yes. I see. So it's just a wording.
Yeah, it's a wording
But
thing.
the appendix says that they're not required.
Oh, it does?
I mean, if it was, right?
Yeah, I don't know what the appendix says, so I'm kind of flying blind a little bit, but and then kind of go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think that's the engineering standards.
Yeah, engineering standards manual is going to be incorporated into appendix A.
Right. So the engineering standards manual would not define what is going to require a street. I wouldn't imagine.
It outlines what requires traffic studies and traffic memos, which trigger certain things, but I have to go back and look at it. It was adopted by council maybe 4 or 5 months ago.
But I'm trying to cross out please.
Yeah, but Dan, it could require a traffic study, but it still doesn't mean that you would have to have a street included within the development, does it?
Yeah, I believe what this is referring to is that all developments that require streets have to be laid out in that certain.
Okay, yeah, and that's kind of what I thought too. So I think the language, I think the wording needs.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we'll tweak the language to.
Right. And then where would the definitions for that be? I tried looking back in module 1 and even into here. Like we use street, alleyway, driveway, drive aisle. Do we have definitions for those?
Did we check in the back? So we have some, did you just check back here on Article 10?
Yeah, I did.
Back
There's
here.
none in there.
Did.
The only thing I see on Article 11 is an alley. But there's no other,
Street, major arterial,
Yeah.
street, half street,
Okay.
collector street.
What, that's in the back of this module too?
Yeah, this is the back of this module too. It's, so what they
okay.
did is Article 11 is temporary. There's Article 10 is going to have all the definitions, but as the other modules accumulate definitions, they're kind of put in this temporarily in Article 11. So you can go,
Okay.
that's the definitions dealing with these, what these articles are going to be back there.
Okay, all right, perfect.
But yeah, we'll clarify that not every development requires a street. So I think we wouldn't want people to give people that idea. All right, moving right along. Comment 11, why do roundabouts not classify as a node? Because, if my understanding, I'll take a stab at answering this, because if it's for the purposes of a connectivity index, a cul-de-sac doesn't connect to anything, right? So a node is an intersection. Maybe I'm just don't know what I don't know, but isn't that why?
I'm not, it's not a test. I don't know.
So here, does it make sense if you look at this index illustration here on the next page? So that's showing where streets connect, right? The nodes are the black dots, so that's every intersection. Oh, but this shows a cul-de-sac as a node. I stand corrected. A roundabout shall not, a roundabout shall be.
Roundabout, yeah.
Roundabout.
Node is a terminus. Or terminus.
Right. Why not? Good question. Do you know, Dan?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
In the connectivity score index calculation, a node is a terminus of a street or the intersection of two or more streets, except the intersections of roundabout shall not be counted as a node.
I think I think when it refers to nodes, it refers to a place where traffic is going to stop. Where in an intersection, you often have stop signs and things like that, where you actually come into a stop or a terminus, like a cul-de-sac, whereas a roundabout is continuous movement. So it's considered a continuation of the street that's free flowing.
Yeah, but if it's about connectivity, just, I don't know, I'm not familiar with the metric, so.
So it's like a numerator and denominator. So you have the number.
So I guess if that's the case, is a higher, and so maybe this helps to answer, and this is kind of what I thought. Maybe it is a, what do you want to say? It is promoting roundabouts in that if you don't have it as a node, you're going to have a lower denominator and your connectivity index would be greater.
Yes, I think that's it.
Okay.
As you know from traffic, anytime you stop and go, it backs up traffic even more. So if you can
Right.
flow of movement, the traffic flows a lot better.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, then that helps it. That's all right. Perfect.
hang
Maybe
on,
it
Matt,
wasn't- maybe it
explain
wasn't.
that. Explain that again.
If
About
what we're trying to say here, and this is, again, I'm not familiar with this metric, but I gotta believe, given the term connectivity index and the equation of links over nodes gives you a connectivity index. And I think we say that we require a connectivity index of 1.7.
And higher is better. Higher is
And
more.
higher is better, right? If we don't include roundabouts as a node and you have a roundabout, it creates a lower denominator in the equation, thereby you get a higher connectivity index.
Yes.
Okay.
Too much math for me.
That's the
No,
highest,
I
that's the
follow.
most amount of math I've done all week, so.
And, this is actually a very prominent tool, these connectivity indexes used in a lot of codes, especially a lot of the more updated codes out there. Realistically, in the city of Maitland, where we're not going to be seeing a lot more subdivisions
Well,
come in,
that's-
it might
yeah.
be once or twice,
Right. Well,
but it is a good practice.
yeah, agreed.
Should we annex a bunch of land and go crazy?
Right, right. Okay, thank you.
So my question about the connectivity index is, why are we including it if, like, what is the stated benefit for the developer?
Stated development or stated benefit?
Because the theory behind connectivity indexes is that it decreases the number of trips because it creates a more walkable neighborhood. So it's easier for a resident to walk if the connectivity index is the ideal figure. It's easier for them to traverse their neighborhood. So thereby, instead of getting in their car, they're walking, which reduces trips. So reducing trips should, in theory, be an incentive. And how do we actually compensate that incentive? Otherwise, we're just allowing or enforcing a standard that isn't really tied to anything. Like, it's just kind of like, oh, we want you to do this, but you're not really saying why.
We can put kind of a, you know, a why connectivity indexes are good, or what the benefits are of them. I'm not sure.
I mean, maybe it's this footnote. You think moving this from a footnote to some sort of statement up here under connectivity index would help? I would say not this is a provision. Or you're going to say a connectivity index ensures that new developments provide a network of connected streets. Would that help?
I just don't think that there's any like teeth to it per se. So it says that the ideal score shall achieve the score of 1.7. But what if they don't? What if there are site constraints that prohibits them from doing that? Is their site plan going to be denied? Why 1.7? Why not a range? Or, if you meet this connectivity index, then like you get 10% off your impact fees, or if you don't, then you have to pay 100% of your impact fees.
Part of the answer is in C, right? So if there's site constraints or things of that nature, topography, then it can be reduced. But I think the answer is, yeah, you have to get 1.7 or else it doesn't get approved, unless you can show that you can't. I don't think.
So what will happen if a developer comes in and they achieve the 1.7 connectivity index, and then they prepare a traffic study showing a reduced number of trips, but we still want to charge them the impact fees based on like the 10th edition ITE that has a higher generation rate. And so they can empirically state that their project has a better benefit, yet we're in essence overcharging them.
I don't know if that's, I have never seen that done in an ordinance where they give any kind of benefits for connectivity index.
I'll say the city of Orlando does it.
They give a benefit for a higher index.
You have to meet a certain range. Yep.
Well,
So,
that's something that we can definitely.
So reduced impact fees for higher connectivity score index.
The ideal connectivity score, because it really should be a range. If it's too low, then your design isn't walkable enough. If it's too high, that means there's too many connections, and then the pedestrian is having to cross a lot more vehicle traffic, which is dangerous. So you kind of want to get like that sweet spot in the middle.
So in the index score of 1.7 was kind of pulled out of some other ordinances. There is no magic number. If you know of some that you think is a more attainable or one that we really want to go for, let us know if you think 1.7 is too high, too low, or if you want a range of X to Y or whatever.
1.7, I feel like it's kind of the upper limit of the range from other ordinances that I've seen. But I mean, personally, I would suggest a range. And it's not a big range. It'd be like 1.3 to 1.7.
So, because you think that, because if the connectivity score is too high, that's not, I see your point. Your point is that if it gets too high, then it's not good either.
Right.
Okay. Is it the case that, is it very frequent where somebody attains too high of an index? Because isn't that like, usually developers are trying to maximize developable land, but.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay.
Okay. Thanks for hearing me out.
That was
Oh,
a good
no,
comment.
yeah.
I mean, obviously you know a lot more about the connectivity index than, or practicing using it. I've used it in a couple of jurisdictions, but probably not near the extent that you have.
I just, it comes at a higher cost to the developer to install like additional infrastructure. And so it's kind of like, why should they, if there's no real teeth to it?
Okay, that's a good point.
Keith, on your next comment, I think is good. I think we did that elsewhere, just missed this one, where instead of referring to links, we make it generic. That was your comment, right? To make it that it's public transportation.
Yeah, I think we're just trying to stay away, describe it in a manner it's understood, but if business names change, we haven't outdated our document.
Yep, good point. Okay. 5.7 back on the footnote. Matt, this is your comment.
Hold on a second. I'm lost in my own document here.
Okay. New bicycle party. 1.72.
To ensure adequate facilities for off-street vehicular parking and loading in proportion to general.
Analysis of all I think this does, Matt, and again, I don't have mine in front of me. All this says is that it's the mobility fee analysis. So we're saying that we're gonna new plan developments and new developments, we're gonna charge them a mobility fee. And that's coming, but they're acknowledging that we need to have one, and it's not here yet. And that what they're having is gonna be based on these standards, which basically says we have to charge a mobility fee.
Okay.
What would that be? Based on what? I mean, what kind of fee would that be?
It's a traffic study, a traffic impact fee, right, Dan? Okay. Harris might have some thoughts on this.
What was the question?
So under what circumstances are people charged a mobility fee, and when do we require a traffic impact analysis?
The mobility fees are charged anytime you are increasing the use, or for instance, if you're going from a house to a duplex, you're charged one additional mobility fee for one single family unit. If you got new development, you're being charged based on the square footage or whatever it is. The traffic impact analysis in the engineering standards and manual that actually lays out when things are triggered, when a TIA is triggered versus just a traffic menu or memo. And it's based on generally the average daily trip that is going to be generated by either that increase or the new development.
So, work for everyone? Make sense? I mean, obviously, it's a placeholder, so that section hasn't been written yet.
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of those situations where when we see it, it's in entirety, we'll be able to kind of have a better, more over.
Right. Yeah. So, does anybody have any more thoughts on the section that doesn't exist?
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Fair enough. Yeah. All right, and that's all for section 1, 5.1. So moving on to parking, everybody's favorite topic. Glenn, if I'm not mistaken, you have the first comment that's been submitted.
This may have been answered earlier than in the discussion was something Matt brought up. And then I think it's addressed, I spotted later on in E as far as change of use goes. But so maybe it's taken care of, but
Okay, when it comes up again later, bring it up again if it's not clear, or we can talk about it then.
okay. Yep.
Move on to 5.9, comment 16. So this talks about what you can't use your parking lot for, right? So this is like basically saying you can't have required parking spaces and take them up with other things. So you're saying about what, Matt, I'm assuming you're saying, what about if restaurants during the pandemic want to use part of their parking lot to expand outdoor seating?
Yeah, you know, I kind of thought about this one too, and I think, you know, with this, we're reducing the parking requirements, so maybe that kind of, by virtue of what we're doing, we're kind of changing that anyway. So maybe what we've been experiencing with some of the unique situations around the last year are maybe predicated on the fact that we've got some over parking or whatnot already. So I just was curious if there was any other sort of exception that we might want to make reference to here or not. Maybe it would be dealt with specially at some point in the future.
Right, because these are kind of like temporary uses, right? So they make exceptions for temporary uses. And I think the key word here is required, not like existing, right? So you might, like you pointed out, there might be a site might have 30 existing parking spaces, but only 20 are required. There's nothing stopping them from taking 10 of their existing parking spaces and repurposing them, you know. Are you fine with how it is now, or do you want to make a note about considering additional temporary uses, such as outdoor dining?
I don't know.
What do folks think about using required parking spaces for other uses? There might be more, other temporary uses, I'd assume.
Well, I think that's dangerous if it's because if these are required parking spaces and then we start changing, you know, if that was the requirement for them to get their development and then we start, you know, moving the bar on this, I just think that's.
But we close down Independence Lane occasionally, you know, for events.
Right, but I mean, was that ever intended when they did that development?
I think it totally was.
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, it actually used to be called Festival Street because it was intended to be closed down. But when they're closed down through an event permit. So
Through a permit, yeah. So I guess that was kind of what I was saying earlier. We would address it separately, and that would be the vehicle special use.
I think you have. I personally think you're right on cue here. I think we need to look at things such as being able to use some of these spaces in a temporary manner for seating or something like that. We have the ability now in a declared emergency, in the case of a declared pandemic, we have the ability to go in and utilize parking lots to do outdoor dining or something like that, especially when we're telling people don't eat indoors. We have that ability to use that. Some jurisdictions use it a lot more than others, but I think you're seeing the trend now where some of them are moving it to more of a permanent allowance instead of just a temporary. I caution about using a required space as a permanent, giving it up and using it permanently for outdoor dining. but
I concur. I concur. You've answered my question. You can delete it. You can delete the my next comment too, Barrett.
Okay. Sure.
So along those lines are, sometimes we have these required, and not saying we're changing them permanently, but this doesn't sort of discourage sort of multi-use of space. So for example, yes, it may be a required parking because this is a business that's 9 to 5 Monday, through Friday, and it requires, those spaces. But if it's not saying you can't use it at another time when you don't need those, are we just saying, this is addressing making a permanent change?
Yeah, I think what this is trying to prevent is a shopping center starting to move like clothing racks out or tires out of the required parking spaces. And those are a little bit, they're somewhat temporary but more permanent. You see it a lot in the big box, like the Home Depots and Lowe's, where they'll put temporary plants out there or mulch or something like that that are seasonal. But it's a slippery slope if you start allowing it permanently to have sales out there.
Or service stations, right? Or car lots, right? Having the cars for sale
Yeah.
in the required spots.
Well, I bet, Ace Hardware may fall into this category because they've taken some of their parking and use it for landscape materials.
Yeah.
And then I guess the key question would be, I don't know whether they have a surplus of parking, right? So if they're required to have 20 spaces and they have 30 and they use 5 of their spaces for storage, well, they're fine because they still have 25 spaces. Right, Dan?
Yeah. It becomes a code enforcement deal. If there's storage out there for a while, code enforcement will go out there, they'll verify what's in excess and what's not. Now,
that might be in violation of other stuff, right? I mean, you can't have outside storage in downtown Maitland, but just in terms of from a perspective of their parking, it's okay. All right, next we're kind of getting, I think, into RVs and boats, which is always a fun topic. Speaking of code enforcement.
Hey, so go back to commercial vehicle. What is the definition of recreational vehicle? What is that? There is no definition in the book. So what is the definition that they're using for this? Or what does that encapsulate?
There should be a definition of recreational vehicle. That was like, didn't make it in there. Let's see here.
I think we called it something else. I remember seeing some other term that was similar.
I know what the answer is in our old code. That might be, if they didn't carry that forward, because right at the last minute we did have them, because it comes up in code enforcement a lot, people parking boats and trailers and things like that in their front yard. And at a certain point, early on, that didn't necessarily get carried forward into this draft, so we haven't carried forward. We might have missed the definition, which is definitely in our existing code, but potentially not here. So that might be a really good catch. We will make sure that that's defined. But in other words, this is the common definition, your boats, jet skis, dirt bikes.
Something else.
Do we call it something else,
I
Dan?
thought we did, like personal something vehicle by. I don't see the definition in here either.
Recreational equipment.
And just so I know,
Mhm.
what is the current code for parking, quote unquote recreational vehicles? Is it
This is the
in-
same one that's carried forward with minor refinements, but essentially you can't park it in front of your house. I mean, you can park it in a garage or in a behind a fence, but you can't park an RV or a boat for more than 48 hours in front of your house. In other words, you can't store it there, but we do have to have some provision for people when they're using it on the weekend. So our code enforcement officer has to go out and observe it there once and then go back and observe it there in excess of 48 hours for it to be a code violation.
Hey, Barrett,
Yeah.
you lumped in, I think boats in the city of Maitland, as long as they are on a trailer, are okay to be parked in front of your house. Trailers without a boat on it are not. RVs are a different story. RVs, I think it's in front of you no more than 48 hours, but I don't think that's boat.
Okay.
Yeah, and boats are also based on the size of the boat, have certain standards as far as how they're parked. But yeah, as long as they're on a trailer on a paved surface, then they're allowed to be at the house.
Yep. And that one goes way back because, hey, this was a town of lakes and people would,
That was D1.
doesn't
D1.
fit their garage.
Okay, here we go. But it has to be 15 feet from the edge of the pavement. That was
Okay.
that's a boat?
in excess of 200 pounds. Yep.
So a boat just has to be 15 feet from
The street.
the street. Okay.
Yep.
And on a paved surface or hard packed driveway.
And that is in our current code?
Yes.
This is
Okay.
what I was thinking of. If it's an RV or things of that nature, like motorcycles on a trailer, it can't be in the front driveway. It has to be
Right. Trailers without. a
garage
boat.
or behind the nearest portion of the building to the road. So it can be in a side yard.
Okay. Staying with the boat thing and if you go down to 4A,
Mhm.
why is houseboat even a consideration? Why is that even in this book? Because under the definition of a houseboat, houseboat is actually back here in the definitions. There is nothing to define what a acceptable boat is in the chain of lakes, and I couldn't find what the definition was in the Muni code either. But a houseboat is in here, and it's a living. I mean, it specifically says that it's a living quarters, a barge or dwelling supported on the water by floats, whether or not it includes a motor fitted for use as a dwelling or for leisurely cruising. We don't allow houseboats right now, so why would we put this in our code now?
We don't allow houseboats? We're not allowed?
I didn't see anything in the Muni code, and I really struggle with this right now, even putting this in. I think that needs to be taken out, because I think that is a disaster waiting to happen.
Do we have any houseboats on, I guess our biggest lake would be what, Lake Maitland?
I don't know, but I think the biggest thing is you start putting houseboats out there and then you start Airbnb houseboats. I think we're looking for a huge disaster. And I think that is just gonna muddy up the waters. I don't think that word or that definition should even be in this code.
I'm not positive, but I think it's the same language as in our existing code, but you said you checked and didn't find it.
I couldn't find anything under the City of Maitland Municipal Code that referred anything to a houseboat. I couldn't find the definition of what boats are acceptable on the lakes, except that it can't go over 40 miles an hour. Well, I know there's a lot of jet skis out there that are going a lot faster than that. But I mean, it's subjective. I think, are we saying watercraft that are, is for pleasure or skiing? But that one specifically says for living. And I don't think that is ever the intention of what the City of Maitland wants on the lakes.
I think we have rules about houseboats don't work because of the sewage, septic, sewage systems. There's rules against it, I think, but
there's not, but we don't have a definition. It's all silent. So by putting this in, I think we're bringing ourselves to a different, putting ourselves in a different position. And I don't think that's what this is intended to be. Because I don't disagree. It's like an RV.
Sure. It's in 21.5.8 right now in our code. 21.5.8, parking, storage, or use of major recreational equipment. For the purposes of the zoning code, major recreational equipment is defined as including boats, houseboats, trailers, pickup campers, or coaches. A houseboat is defined as a barge or dwelling supported on the water by floats, whether or not it includes a motor fitted for use as dwelling or cruising. Likewise, the parking or storage of any houseboat is prohibited in any zoning historic district.
So where was that? You're reading that from?
21.5.8. The same place where this is, like the parking of major recreational vehicles are now in our muni code.
I think that just is, we do not need to go down that road.
Is it based on the size or the environmental impacts, or what's the major concern? Is
I think environmental impacts, just like Glenn was saying with the, are you going to have sewage out to the boats? Then you've got to worry about dumping into the lake. Then you have to worry about, I just think that is just going to end up being a disaster, because you put a houseboat out there, somebody ties it to their dock, it becomes almost a permanent fixture, and then somebody starts Airbnb-ing it or VBRO. I think that is just not where the city ever wanted to be.
Well, to be clear, okay, so it's been there, and this is just carrying it forward, but you're thinking we should have an explicit ban of houseboats in the city?
I do, because I think we have a hard enough time getting RVs with code enforcement being, I've got somebody living in one behind me. I've called code enforcement. I've called code enforcement. They're still living in there. So, if we can't enforce what we have, I don't think we should be doing anything like this. I think this is just
beyond just tying it to somebody's property. It's almost also sounds like as long as you have a Maitland sticker, boat, lake sticker, you don't even need to have a piece of a land property. Does that open us up for that also?
That's my other concern.
So is it? So delete. Considered a houseboat? Well, it's defined as whether or not it includes a motor as a dwelling or for leisurely cruising. So it's like a party barge, right? A barge or dwelling. So it's supported by floats.
A pontoon boat is one thing, but a houseboat is a totally
floating on the water.
I was trying to ask where a yacht would fit in.
So a yacht has dwelling quarters, right?
I'm not a boat person.
Me either.
It probably won't be able to be launched off from Fort Maitland.
Yeah, I don't think you can I don't think you're allowed over 26 feet, is it, Glenn?
Or, it might even be smaller than that.
Yeah.
And 8.5 feet wide.
So you say, Glenn, it's 23 feet long and 8 feet wide?
8.5 feet wide is the width. I forget the exact length, but I don't think you can get a sticker for a boat that is 26 feet.
Yeah, I can't remember but it is some,
And that's what I mean. There were restrictions. I saw this years ago. There were other restrictions that you have to be above the floodplain, above the 100-year for any system for sewage system.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, we're not to be defensive, but this is all just, yeah, stuff that's carried forward from our existing code, and we hadn't heard it being a problem before, but we can certainly talk about deleting it, especially if there's not any out there right now that we're gonna make non-conforming.
I don't have one, so.
You don't have any houseboat thing?
No.
I don't either.
No.
All right, good call. So 59482. Next one is that I have is on page 59 and 510.
which number are you looking at
I'm
now?
not looking at number 17.
Okay.
Why does it say on land 482? Where am I?
Sorry, that I said you could delete that,
Oh, okay,
yeah, that's.
okay.
I
And 18 is for B. If a boat trailer is parked on a launch attached to water. Whose comment was this? I didn't mark that down.
It's mine. I think it just something got orphaned. It got orphaned on the other page. Let me go.
Oh. What if not operational? Oh, those are both comments. Okay, sorry, Glenn.
Yeah, so as you read through, so it says major recreational equipment exceeds 102 inches, parked or stored only if the equipment or trailer meets one of the following standards. So I think that what gets me here is that in B, we don't talk anything about tags and stickers, but we talk about tags and stickers in D. So are we saying that you can have a boat trailer with no documentation as long as it's set on a launch attached to a waterway? And that's the way I read it.
If it,
I-
oh, I see.
This is about parking, and I think it's about the private ramps that are around the lakes that the people leave their trailer on those ramps.
So the boat trailer need a tag or sticker, or just the boat?
You're saying that the trailer should be operational just as it says it should be if it was in the front yard.
Well, yeah, I mean, it should have I would say if it's there, that's the trailer's meant to be put on the street. So it shouldn't be tagged and credentialed.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and then on 4.D, it's actually 4.DI. So the description in there is it is a boat that weighs in excess of 200 pounds is operational. So if it's not operational, is it okay?
No, this is stuff, wait. It has to be operational. Major recreational vehicle can only be parked if it meets these standards. So in other words, an inoperational boat would not meet the standard, so it could not be parked.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. It's like a car on blocks. So if you can boat on a trailer, that doesn't work.
Yeah. So this would be saying you can't have this you can't have an inoperational boat.
Okay, maybe I was,
It is, yeah, it's a bit of a logic. I
This-
see.
This stemmed from years ago. There's a guy that spent about 10 years building his little private Noah's Ark right on Horatio, and he had it parked there out front forever. And
Is that a houseboat?
yeah, it was actually. It was like it was some small sailboat slash liveaboard.
Cool.
okay, so maybe I was reading that one as a either or statement. And then the other comment related to I is does this align with what we have in the residential verbiage related to storage of trailers? That's what I didn't go back and look.
I think this is the only place where we talk about it. Are you thinking of another? I'm trying to think about where else we talk about it.
I thought in module 1 somewhere there was some verbiage about what could be stored in in yards and things, and I thought boat trailers was in some of that verbiage.
Number one.
Yeah, module.
This is the only place I remember, but
We can go back and check. Yeah, I think I don't remember that, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So for DI.
I just want to make sure we're not contradicting.
Sure. Did we discuss front yard? It's residential parking specifically, right?
I think it was something.
Or boats.
And I thought I had something that language Dan was talking about earlier about being on a paved surface.
Yes, that was like 3 years ago, and it was for boats didn't come up in the conversation, but it was for cars that were parked. The issue that happened, there was a neighborhood, I don't remember which one it was, where one of the residents had like 7 cars all parked in front of their house, and none of them were in the driveway. And so that's where the driveway designation ordinance came from, where you have to go in and say, this is my driveway and my cars will only be parked here.
Yeah, that's right. It's like a front yard parking ordinance. That was happening right
Yeah.
when I was joining
Yeah.
staff.
Yeah, that I may be my memory may be digging that far back, and it may not have been in module 1.
And that makes sense because that only addressed cars and not boats or RVs. You want to? We can still go back and check, but I think that sounds plausible to me.
Okay.
Comment 21. It's you too, Mr. Chairman, I think.
So this one, I just wanted to clarify this. Below all parking lots and loading areas shall be surfaced. My question do boat ramps, I'm assuming boat ramps have different guidelines because they're adjacency to water? Because this was basically introducing a lot of foreign elements we may not want.
Huh, that's a very interesting question. We didn't hear anything about that from our public works director about materials used in proximity to bodies of water.
No, the way I'm reading this looks like it's really looking at like parking lots of commercial.
Correct, but I think but it's right. But I guess it would also, so not necessarily boat launches. This is just parking lots.
I just want to make sure that's boat ramps are addressed somewhere differently. I don't remember seeing it.
Waterfront structures, boat ramps fall into the category of waterfront structures, and those are addressed later on in this module. So,
Okay. I think because it was just coming at the tail end of all the boats, so I'm turning off material.
It's
I
a good
don't,
we'll okay. Comment number 22, Matt, you had two
Yeah.
questions about the allowed materials.
Yeah, and Barrett, now that I see it says bonded, you can eliminate my comment.
Okay. And you have comment 23, so the item B on page 12.
Yeah, I read this a couple of times, and I would just like to, I just felt like it was something, somebody could kind of discuss it or explain it to me. That might help me understand it better.
I can take a try at it. So all this is saying is that you can't back out of a parking spot over a public street or sidewalk, except for single family or duplex dwellings. So for any commercial use, you can't. So in some old parking lots, for example, you almost have to like back out over the sidewalk to get out of that parking spot. Like if you have a sidewalk and then a parking space right next to it, this is saying you shouldn't have to. You have to cross out into the right of way to get out of the parking spot. Is how I read it.
So is it kind of like Artco, the pool supply store?
Is that, yeah, maybe. Is that the one on 1792?
Just north of Cappy's.
I was gonna say Bonus Studio, it used to be called Bonus Studio, right on Swoop, next door to the chiropractor, and the chiropractor backs out onto the street.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's
well,
no sidewalk, but
the Korean restaurant too, right? Seoul Gardens.
yeah, absolutely.
So that's what this is talking about? That's not allowed.
I think that's how I read it.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
that kind of makes
that helps. Again, I appreciate the conversation. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
okay.
Yeah, that's the same as parking either, so you can't park over a sidewalk, or you gotta have the parking stop, so you're not blocking a sidewalk with a long car or anything.
And ended up deleting it just because there were so many examples, but
Oh, because yeah, but that doesn't mean we want to encourage more of it. I don't think.
yep.
The next one is a comment about enforcement in the same list.
Yeah, it maybe enforcement was the wrong comment, but it just seems like that's an awful it's a lot of words with no real teeth. I don't I mean, I get the concept, but I get maybe that's just the nature of what we're doing here. It's
how would you, I mean, how could we word it differently to capture all scenarios, right? Because you have so many different configurations. I'm just not sure how to make it
was to the maximum. I think maybe what kind of threw me a little bit was, we're kind of given this general, and then we say to the maximum extent practicable. I don't know.
Do you think that reasonable people could disagree about that a lot?
100%.
Yeah.
I just love that flexible language.
Yeah. I'm just not sure how to. I mean, I think it's a good concept, right? That's a principle that we want to enforce.
I get the principle. Yeah, I totally get the principle. I just, again, I'm trying to think about in practicality, if we're if we're having a development go through a review, what does the maximum extent practicable really mean? And is that necessary? I don't know. That was really where I think my kind of catch up, or my hang up rather, with this item was. So
So if you get, would it help if you just had a period after vehicular traffic?
I think we addressed something language on that similar in the module 1. It was basically just putting some parameters around what we deem as practical. Can't say that. It seems like we put, due to geometry or physical limitations, or that I thought we had some language like that in one of the modules where we thought something was vague like this. And so we put some things, but I think the idea was you didn't want to put, well, it's going to cost too much. That's not.
yeah, now that you're saying that, Keith, I seem to recall you're right. I can't remember where it was, and I don't necessarily want to try to find it right now, but.
Right, refer to.
Dig that language up.
We added that language at one point where we talked about cross access, because we said that there may be certain circumstances that are environmental or topographic features that you can't cross access, or you can't make that connection. So I think that's where we used it back in the past.
You know what? We also used it, I think this discussion came up in the carryout window discussion at P&Z.
Yes, I think that was it.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I think I would. I mean, I think it'd be better to just lop off the after it says vehicular traffic, just hit period.
That's kind of what I think. I think then Dan disagrees with me.
No, I mean, it's okay. It still gives us the flexibility in the verbiage minimally exposed.
Right.
There are going to be cases where you have a shopping center or a grocery store where you're going to have walking in between the parking lot and the store. So to design it where it's minimally exposed, it's somewhat discretionary, but it gives enough flexibility that we're not tying our hands. That just kills any design or development.
I tend to think so. I don't think it actually changes the meaning at all. If you were to delete to the maximum extent practical, this is just minimally exposed. That's what you're trying to achieve in your design. Are folks okay with that? But I think then otherwise it's just, you wrote it, it's difficult to try to place criteria on it.
Hey, Dan, I just thought of another parking. Publix has parking that backs up onto the street.
Is that a public right of way though?
Yeah, sure. That street that goes between them and the apartments. Now the sidewalk is in front of the cars, but that on-street parking backs onto the street.
But that's considered off-street parking, isn't by the.
Ooh, true. Yeah, I think it is. It's the 45-degree angled spots, what you're thinking of, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, I thought there was language in
1792, and there's some 45-degree angled spots for compact only. But yeah, I think you're right. I think those are considered on-street parking.
Okay.
Because they're separated by that wall from the rest of the parking lot.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Sure.
We do have spaces around town. We're trying to not add to them. The Forever Friends Bet has a couple parking spots right off of Swoop that you pretty much have to back up on the Swoop to get in and out of their spaces, and that was the only parking they had.
Okay, which comment? Sorry, I'm losing track of which comment we're on. 25.
Yeah, I don't know what the number is. The one about the widths.
Right.
I read that. So it talks about access ways for internal. And I actually, Glenn, this is one where I was kind of thinking of the Publix parking lot too, right? Because you got for two-way, you'd have a 24 24 feet in width for two-way traffic with a minimum of 20 feet in width along a designated fire access route. So does that mean that we'd have, if it's along a designated fire access route, then it's got to be 20 feet for a one-way?
Right.
Okay, it seems like that could be, I don't know, maybe I had a hard time because it's when it says with a, it seems like it's referring to the two-way traffic component.
I see. Yeah, it's a little confusing because you're like, it has to be 18 if it's one way, 24 feet. But in both cases, it has to be a minimum of 20 feet. And you're like, wait, the two-way traffic's already a minimum of 24 feet. So what you're saying is it almost suggests that it could be narrower if it's a designated fire access where you go to a street.
Yeah, I think that meant 18 feet one way to 20 if it's a fire access route. I
But
think it's meant for one way.
20, right. The way it's written is it's almost like, Yeah.
It's written. a little wonky.
okay.
Yeah, the 20 feet should be, I don't know what y'all said, I couldn't hear you, but maybe it should be a minimum of 18 feet in width for a one-way traffic with a minimum of 20 feet for a designated fire access route and 24 feet in width for a two-way traffic.
Yeah, that's what we were saying quietly.
Okay, all right, sorry.
Sorry. Okay, cool. $26.
So yeah, 26, I wasn't clear. And maybe I didn't read it hard enough but I was having a hard time. Are we talking about the subsection 2 prior to this or after this?
Yeah, I think, is there a numbering problem? 'Cause
I think it's referring to the compact cars below.
that's 2.
Right. Except provided in subsection 2 below,
Oh.
which is compact cars, vehicle spaces shall meet this. Blah, 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 blah.
Oh, right, because see, this allows for it to be smaller, a 16 foot per vehicle for compact cars. And that is the very next section. Just there's a bunch of graphics now in the way, so it's on a different page.
Yeah, I think it was just confusing to me. Was it the previous subsection 2 or the next subsection 2?
Yeah, no, it is, and because we added some more graphics in there, which kind of bumped it to a further page, but yeah.
Maybe we just move the graphics below 2 or 3. So there's not a big lag in between.
Yeah. I think that would help if because initially in the text, that subsection is immediately below this text. But because we've got these graphics in the table, it offsets it. So we're saying we would probably address it that compact car subsection came up before the graphics.
Okay. Or if you can't, just say within this paragraph.
Okay. Okay. $27, note 4.
Yeah, when I was going through this table, it was just how we reference how ADA is in play here. I know we talk about accessible spaces under subsection 3. Is that how it's intended to, is that intended to tie to that table?
In terms of the width and the length of the spaces.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to accommodate for some ADA, spaces. And I guess that's my question is how are we,
So would it be to incorporate ADA requirements?
well, it's just either a reference, and you may be trying to do it in that subsection 3. I wasn't making the connection.
Okay. I see. So maybe have that be a note in that table, just so that's not left out. Or would it be maybe additional column or?
I may be overcritical. When I was reading through it, I kept having to work my way over to that other info.
Gotcha. And that was part of it is, yeah, because we have the table and then these graphics, but we'll look at it. We'll look at it for sure. We're talking about accessibility standards in the parking dimensions table.
Having an accessibility graphic.
No, and whether accessibility is addressed in a subsection, but not explicitly addressed in the table, which talks about dimensions. So in that table you're looking at, it doesn't have anything about ADA spaces, and ADA spaces are addressed 2 pages later.
It's just making sure that we're
File.
making sure they understand they have to take ADA into account in addition to this table.
Yeah, and I remember when we were going through this, there was a reason we specifically left out the ADA. It was requested that we leave it out, and I think it was because it was addressed in the building code, and they didn't want to have anything conflicting in there if the building code ever changed or anything like that. There was some reason, I don't remember exactly why, but they were consciously deciding to take it out of here and just let the building code reference it.
Oh, okay. That rings a bell.
I'm not proposing to put any detail in there. It's more as a reference that.
Okay.
Yeah, put ADA standards and reference whatever the section of the ADA requirements is, or.
And you do that a couple paragraphs in. I just don't know if it connects to that table very well.
Okay.
The other thing may be you might want to put put the reference as to where the ADA is in the building code, in which, what module or what chapter.
It's actually referenced on page 516 at the top.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in there. I just couldn't connect it to the table.
Kathleen, was that a cat that just walked by?
Yes.
That was it.
She always magically shows up when I'm doing this at night.
We only see you when you talk, so we don't get to see the cat unless you're talking.
Exactly.
He's back.
No.
All right. So far, so good. 28.
But the word nuisance is what's kind of bothering me.
Yeah. If it helps, drainage is addressed holistically for sites elsewhere. This is just dealing with parking lots.
Yeah, but why would, I guess then why would we just not make reference to where drainage is related other ways, and would a parking lot be any different than any other part of a development? As it relates to adjacent property.
True, fair, yeah, fair enough. It's
Seems like it was just carried
there's a
forward.
carry forward. So comment, is this necessary?
I mean, we make reference to other standard sections in the exterior lighting and landscaping. I just felt like it might be prudent for us to do the same thing as it relates to drainage.
Sure. Okay. You're right, because you can't do that anyway, whether it's a parking lot or not. So point taken. There's no further discussion. Comment 29 is also on 516. About a width of the primary drive aisles.
Yeah, is that covered? Is that covered in the graphics above in table 5.2.4?
We talked about drive aisles before, didn't we? About
We did.
one way and two way and fire lanes. So the idea that we don't want to repeat it here.
Well, that was called an access way up above. This is called the primary drive aisle.
Ah, okay.
I mean, maybe it's the same thing. We use all these different terms and I don't know if there's, I don't
Right.
know what the
What is it called?
necessary.
This way. Yeah.
But I think
It might be the same. But you're okay. That's something I wasn't listening, Dan, when you and Kim were discussing this. Did that? You see where we are? Yeah.
Primary drive aisles. There was at one point where we had a graphic where it showed the street coming in and then having a drive aisle that kind of went across the front, but I don't know what happened to that.
Is it on 518? That's pedestrian pathways. So never mind.
Yeah, it's basically saying that your main entrance into the center needs to be look and feel like an extension of the access road.
It does say that. Oh, you're saying there's a graphic?
Yeah.
All right, we don't have an answer for that, so possibly we'll leave that comment in and see if that's defined elsewhere.
it may just be that, and so maybe from a width perspective, you refer to figure 5.2.4, and it's the other features that below in terms of sidewalk or curb delineated passageway that further defines a primary drive aisle. Is that the intention?
I
From a
think,
width standpoint, you use that figure.
okay, we need to clarify this somehow. I think that's the point.
It came out of the code assessment. According to the footnote.
Came out of code assessment that we needed to have something in here. Okay, well,
Okay, all good.
yeah, no, good catch. Moving on to Publix parking lot, Glenn.
It always helps, you see, for me to have examples, but
Yeah,
and I saw the graphic talked about 200 feet and I wasn't sure what that meant. So in my mind, and I think at the time I objected to it, that sidewalk system that goes around the north side, the one we were talking about down the side street, should be the same sidewalk system that should be in the interior of the property as well, because they put shops all the way around that parking lot. And really, there's a lot of pedestrian traffic walking through there. And so it's addressed in here, and it mentioned 200 feet, but I didn't know, using Publix as an example, if that would have been included.
Well, I don't know. Is it more than 200 feet wide?
Yeah, I didn't know that one.
I don't know that either. That's a good question. And I know that it's lined up with the entrance, right? Because that's one of them, is that the sidewalk has to be lined up. So it's, the existing sidewalk there is lined up with the main entrance to Publix. So you can come out there, and there's that separated footpath or sidewalk, which goes all the way to those out parcels. But your question is, that's on the north side.
Yeah, I'm saying
on the south.
50% of their parking is towards the south.
Right.
And
you'd have to walk, in other words, all the way around, and like a.
Which you won't do.
Correct.
And so now there's a whole 50% of their retail is also kind of towards the south. And so it's really not a very pedestrian friendly development, other than if you're on the far north side. If you're trying to minimize walking through parking lots, which this section was.
Sure. No, that's something we can look at the testing, right? And
yeah, that's what helps me. Sure.
Yeah.
And again, I'm saying it because we also encouraged them at the time. A guy named Steve Brandon built that to put those retail shops.
Mm-hmm.
So what the concern is that we don't do it in Publix, is that?
Yeah, Dan. So in the Publix lot, you don't shop at Publix enough. You're not right.
I
We're talking about
never shop
that same where those 45-degree angle lots are. There's a pedestrian pathway which connects Publix to the out parcels. It's brick. It's very well delineated. It's separated by a wall from parking spaces. And Glenn's pointing out that that's on the far north boundary of the project. There is no similar pedestrian pathway on the south side of the project. Whereas you have a lot of the out parcels of that way, you have parking spots over that side, but there's no pedestrian pathway to accommodate that. We don't know the length of whether it's 200 feet. And so the question is, under this new code, would that require them to have an additional pedestrian pathway?
Yeah, even if it's on the far south side, which is consistent with the conversation earlier about this cross access for walkability. And because if you walk around the south side of Publix, you go around their service entrance, there is no sidewalk on that side.
Right. It's like the loading area, and it's
right.
And there's cross traffic too, because it connects out to the street. So it's
correct. You walk around a blind wall. Yep.
I know exactly what you're talking about. So we'll check. I think that's a great thing that would be a great thing to do during testing, is to see if we were to come in for that development with this current code, how would that pedestrian access, would that be addressed, or is that just a unique circumstance?
I think that's a built non-conforming.
Of course, not saying that we'd force them to change it.
Yeah.
But were that same development happened today?
Okay, so look at MCN lot 2.
Okay.
You remember the layout of that?
Yeah. Are you talking loud enough so they can hear too?
No, because they're not going to see it. MCN lot.
And if that's non-conforming, and to these standards, but Publix is not very old. That pause is not very old. Yeah.
Lot 2 has a pedestrian pathway all the way
Right down the middle, right.
Right, and then it connects to the out parcels.
And that's good. And we just want to make sure that all things under this new code, if a similar development like Publix were to come in today, would they be required to have additional pedestrian accommodations?
Yes, they would.
Okay.
If a new development were to come in today, they would have to meet that.
I know, but is that 200 feet? Well,
But where's the 200 feet?
Is that
You'll see the graphic coming up, I think, soon. And of course, they'd have to meet the standard, but is the standard of 200 feet, would that include Publix, which has retail far on the south side, not just its own plaza, but the bank, there's that little sour bread dough company, again, for that walkability.
I understand your question perfectly. I don't know why I'm having a hard time explaining it to Dan.
No, it would be, I think it's the 200, it's 200 max. If you look at item A under there, it would be pedestrian pathways are provided at a minimum every 6 parallel parking rows or every 3 double row parking bays.
Right. So not looking at the site plan, I don't know if that would trigger it in this
That
specific
was my
site we're
question.
talking about.
Yeah, I think it would.
Okay.
Because I'm not saying it's a problem because we would require it.
I guess it would be, yeah, either way it would, because you'd have there's four rows.
Oh, okay. There's your answer. Glenn, so yes, it would.
Yeah, okay. And that's what I was questioning, you smart people.
All right. 31, yeah, that makes sense. So it's just the making the verbiage consistent.
Is that mine? Yeah, I think, and I don't know, Barrett, it seems to me, and I was kind of being a little bit this way with some of this, drive aisle, pathway. There's just a lot of different terms that maybe they're meant to be different or maybe they're not. I didn't know if these were maybe, pieced in part from other documents that we're just getting some inconsistencies. But I think one of the things that I would request from the consultant is that somebody go through and do a bit of a consistency check throughout it. Because, we're using walkway, pathway. I mean, maybe it's no different, but maybe it is a difference. I don't know.
The other example is drive aisle. Drive aisle and
Driveway, alleyway, driveway, drive aisle.
okay. I think that's a good reminder.
And then next comment is relative to pickup and drop off areas. It says, if appropriate.
Yeah.
What would define appropriate? I don't know.
It's a good question. I was thinking about that. It probably depends a little bit on the use, right? Or I agree with you. That's not very well defined. What do folks think? Is that something that should be based simply on like the size of the development?
This is still under large parking lot,
3 pickup and drop off areas.
which is still under the large parking lot of 200 spaces or more.
Okay, so that's for 200 spaces or more.
Yeah.
But then under what circumstances would it not be appropriate?
Don't know. I would think it'd be appropriate in every situation.
That's kind of where I was.
Yeah, especially of that size. I mean, if it was a small single tenant.
Right. If it's a 10 parking space lot, you're not going to have a pickup or drop off area, right? But
Okay.
my next comment is, and maybe this just isn't the appropriate spot, but we don't have any reference to electrical vehicle charging spaces.
We talk about them in the sustainability section, but you're right, they probably should be referenced when we're talking about parking lot standards.
Yeah, and maybe it's not we're not defining the requirement here. Maybe we let that be defined in the sustainability standards, but we at least make reference to it here for that connection.
We actually were going to put a standard in here for required EV parking spaces per number of total spaces.
Okay.
It looks like it hasn't gotten in here yet. I know the Sustainability Advisory Committee wanted to make some recommendations on that,
Right.
and they have not met to make that recommendation yet, but we did
Okay.
talk about putting them in here as a standard, because there's a lot of jurisdictions have a standard number of spaces.
Got it. Okay.
Before we get too far from the original table and exhibit, sorry, I kept missing my opportunity to chime in. Table 5.2.
5.2.4.
Yes. Or even here is good. So the far right column of the table, you don't have to scroll up, is designated as like type F, which is a double row of parking, but there isn't an example of that provided in the graphic.
Oh, okay. Right.
So maybe the graphic can be like, I don't know, it can be reconfigured so the angle parking or something, the double row, yeah, the double row isn't depicted anywhere.
True. Yeah, good catch. I think we borrowed this graphic from elsewhere, so we might need to modify it.
Just like our report cards, we just don't have any S in them.
No, good catch. Do you have anything else?
Nope, that was just something I just noticed.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So are we ready to go on to everybody's favorite topic, off-street vehicular parking standards?
Hey, Jack, kind of just piggybacking on that.
Sure.
All of the, it makes allotments for compact car parking. So where are the other cars supposed to park? As in pickup trucks or SUVs or things like that?
Only a certain percentage of them can be compact, right?
Yeah, but they always designate compact car spots. They don't ever say, here's where the big ass cars park. Because and it's a serious question, because I was in Office Depot in Winter Park and I was in a parking space and a pickup truck pulled up next to me and I couldn't get out of my car. I had to physically move my car so I could get out of my car. So I was just, curious, how does that get factored in? And they always designate compact cars, but they never designate other parking spaces to say they're
oversized
wider,
vehicles.
longer, or what?
So, and generally, I guess in my experience, those are all kind of wrapped into the normal 9x18 parking spots. It's only when you have the compact that are much different, or you have the bus parking or the oversized vehicle parking in a development or a commercial parking lot that has those type of uses. We can put an oversized parking. We'd have to research what the average percentage would be, and what percentage of a parking lot you typically get these oversized vehicles. And
I like that Clean's term better.
You'll get, yeah, you'll get pushback though, because the standard parking space
I think you will.
is supposed to accommodate.
And then you code enforce someone who's got a big dually vehicle and a non-oversized parking spot. I don't know. I've never come across that. Not to say it's a bad idea at all, but we'd have to figure out how to.
And then he's saying they have to park the furthest away because that's where they fit best. It's sort of a.
And then that becomes an enforcement issue too then.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that's what Kathleen is saying. I heard her say maybe just require them to have them available, right? Is that kind of what you're suggesting? Not that they would require that they park there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, until you get stuck in your car and you can't get out of your car, it's like, what? I mean, I had to physically move my car to a different parking space so I could get out of my car because I could not get out of my car the way this pickup truck parked next to me.
And that certainly, it actually probably was a poor parking job on their part, so they were too close to the line or something, and that happens.
Are you confessing, Glenn?
Yeah, that one wasn't me. I always park as far away as possible.
So if we do something like oversized, I think it's going to be difficult to enforce because you're going to get someone who's potentially got a car that they think is a hot rod and they don't want anybody parked around them, so they're going to take up one of these oversized lot spaces to put their little car in there versus
Right.
I'm not opposed to doing it. We got to figure out how to do it and how to, or do we incentivize it because people aren't going to want to give up extra pavement space, less parking spots.
Yep.
And I understand, but it more of it is kind of a curiosity question, but also it's like, well, you always see compact car parking,
Right.
the metal signs, but you never see big ass car parking spots.
Because they can pick up extra parking spaces by doing that. It's harder the other way around.
Yep. There's no incentive for them to go the other way around.
Yep.
Developer.
It was like I said, it was a curiosity.
I feel like some spots, like I have seen them before. I'm trying to think of where. They're like big box stores, I guess, right?
Yeah, or you see
Something
like in stadiums where people bring an RV or a bus
Yeah.
or something like that. A concert venue or something like that.
Okay, well, we can ask about it.
How about a houseboat parking spot?
That too.
On land.
On land only. Now, I know we had some comments about these. So we have about just under 40 minutes left. Everybody's feeling like we need to stretch, or we ready to talk about a number of
They're comfortable. They're in their homes. We're stuck at these.
we're stuck under the fluorescent lights. That's pretty good. All right. So comment number 35. Keith, I believe you have the first one.
Well, hey, Barrett, I actually had 34, and it was maybe just a general type thing, right? It just for.
I'm sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Look, I'll be honest with you. I don't know that I personally have got a whole lot of appreciation for some of the nuanced differences between, what the current standard is versus the new. But I was just curious to see, and maybe this is just something that could be done during the testing phase or something. But for like a Maitland City Center or a 400 North or one of these more recent developments that we've gone through, what would be the calculation of number of spaces that would be required under the current standards versus these proposed new, just to get kind of an order of magnitude difference, delta.
We can run that scenario on a couple of them. I can tell you historically, we have been very overparked in our standards. Our parking standards are way outdated, and we are overparked. If you look at national averages, you look at APA studies, you look at surrounding jurisdictions, we like the cars here in Maitland, and we give people any parking space they want.
Right.
So I think what this new code is proposing as a reduction is to bring it more in line with the reality of the standard and the reality of what people are doing nowadays.
Sure.
But we can run some scenarios and say it would have been this and now it's this, or it was.
And I think that does happen. It happened in the testing phase. I think you're right. And
again, I'm not in opposition to any of it. I just was kind of curious from my own perspective of what does it mean? What are we talking about? I guess. So yeah, that's good. I appreciate it, Dan.
Yeah, in some of the uses that we had historically, like restaurants or movie theaters, where you park it per employee plus per this plus per that, whereas now we're going to just a flat rate. I think that's where you're going to see your biggest variable, but that's hard to determine because each tenant has a different size number of
Right.
employees or
Right.
dining space or whatever it may be.
Yeah, across the board, we made it, we tried, if where there's changes, we try to make it easier and more transparent to calculate. So you're not going in and counting employees, you're not counting tables, things that aren't going to change. It's building size typically, or sometimes it was fire capacity, but all things that are basically you can go to the assessor's website and find it, not like have to guess how many seats there are in the Enzion, right? Like that's a proprietary number that changes, quite frankly, right? Depending on how they configure things. So, but yeah, I mean, from an overall perspective, it would be good to have an analysis of what changes are being proposed, like how big,
Okay.
small are the changes. And I think we can go a little bit out of order here because I think this naturally segues into Keith's comment 36.
Yeah, I stated that down later, but I think it is part of this conversation. Mine was just, as I'm looking through and most all of these items in the table did a reduced parking count in the DM and the DMPD. And I just wanted to sort of hear you guys as sort of logics on that. I know part of that I'm assuming is the fact that we're introducing a lot of walkability in those areas. We're introducing the idea of there being residents there. But there may be some of these that not all of those can take advantage of that. And just as we look at these, not just sort of auto say, well, you can have less. And again, I'm not proposing for more parking. I just want to look and just make sure we don't have any barriers in those areas that we can't take advantage of that reduce, because we put these walls up that you can't walk through to go from one parking lot to the next. So, now you're starting to reduce walkability and create edges and things. So anyway, I'm just sort of curious if there's other logics besides the ones I assumed about why we can do natural reductions in those areas.
So I think this goes back to the philosophy that we've been working on for a couple of years, that we are way over parked. And you're right, we do want to make it more of a walkable downtown. If you recall, when we adopted the downtown Maitland standards, what we said is that the parking is cut in half to promote walkability, biking, rideshare, things like that. There is a maximum parking in downtown, which is like, I think it's 10% above the minimum is the maximum. But we also say in there that you can lobby to ask for more parking above the maximum, but you have to have those spaces above that maximum be dedicated to the public through a public access easement. So we start building this downtown parking inventory. So we're not telling them you can't do it, but we're saying if you do above the maximum, then you have to have it open to the public. You can't just reserve it for your tenants only. So we give that out, but in the downtown, we're really trying to create that sense of gathering place. And we historically in Maitland have been training this behavior of give everybody a parking spot. They're going to drive, they're going to park. And if you look at a lot of our downtown and even a lot of outside the downtown, the vast majority of the time, I think it's probably 70 or 80% of the time, you're really looking at about 30 to 45% utilization maximum of a parking lot. So you've got a lot of pervious surface that's just causing stormwater runoff, it's causing heat islands, it could be green or it could be more development, and we're wasting it with just pavement that's sitting there.
And I would add to that two things. One is that it's kind of, well, three things. One, I think you hit a lot of them, right? You try to make it walkable. I think I agree with you. It's predicated on kind of the idea of like a park once kind of environment where you might park one time and then go to two or three, like a restaurant and then a shop and then maybe a different destinations without moving your car, right? So there's less parking per vehicle trip. Finally, I think it's also predicated on the idea that ultimately we're going to have some parking, public parking garages, not only the public shared parking that Dan's talking about, but also one or more public garages that would be shared parking for all of these downtown businesses.
Are we also sort of setting that we're painting a picture for people that come into this area that we want parking to be a bit of a flexible use? And I use the Wells Fargo Bank, for example. I don't know if they're really want a flexible use, but I see their parking lot get used, by people that aren't going to that building. So I'm just sort of curious, is that the picture we're painting too? Is that hey, if you come into this area, we're trying to look at reducing the count, and so there may be some flexible uses that we'd like you guys to accommodate with.
Yeah, absolutely. We extended the distance for the shared parking agreements. I built that inventory, as Barrett said, that the park once was originally came out of the downtown master plan that was adopted many years ago, that created this two parking deck type system where you do just park once. But we do have a lot of uses like churches and stuff like that have a lot of parking because they do have a peak time, but the vast majority of time it's not being used and it's just sitting there.
Yeah, and I think that's why sort of you're bringing people in, you're painting that picture, and I don't know if it's something we write in an agreement for them to take that property, but like a church or somebody that has peak uses, and I agree, we don't want to take their spaces away if they're in their peak hours, but if those spaces aren't being used, I assume we would be discouraging them to put big no parking signs up there. We'll tow you away. So that's sort of painting this big picture of, okay, when these people come in, they just all need to know that's the way we're hoping this area can evolve.
And that's how the standards, at least the downtown portion, were adopted by council. Is you have to dedicate it to public if you do more than that maximum.
Okay.
That people are still not used to using the parking garages like the Village of Lake Lily, right, or MC or Maitland City Center. Those are great examples of places where you can park in those parking decks and go to a retailer in that complex, walk down the street to a different restaurant, visit the park, spend all day downtown, and just by using those parking spaces. But I think people are still not quite used to that. And I think there's going to be a bit of a shift, of a cultural shift, where people have to get used to doing that. People often don't think about that.
My question is I think the parking is reduced too low, because you have a 0.1 for a resident or visitor on the multifamily. And I don't know of anybody who is gonna, if you're gonna go visit somebody who lives in an apartment complex, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna be driving a car. Number one. Number two, why didn't, when they built City Hall, did they not build more parking for the employees? Because they all park over in Wells Fargo. Is that not correct?
A lot of them do, yeah, and that's kind of a formal agreement with the Wells Fargo people. The city originally had, on the other side of Independence Square, was the city employee parking lot, and they used that for, well, at least for the past 3 or 4 years, as a staging area to do construction. So the employees were kind of somewhat kicked out of that area.
Well, I just struggle with, you can't just take somebody's private property and say, oh, well, you get to park your cars on it without a written agreement or permission or a, liability. There's so many things there, and you can't just expect some property owner, they've got private property rights. You can't just expect them to roll over and say, sure, you can park here anytime. It doesn't work that way. In the real world, it may work in a book, but it doesn't work that way in the real world. And I just think that some of this stuff is not feasible, and they're setting us up to fail with some of this parking. When you start going to this table, you can't have banquets with 2 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. And if you think somebody's gonna walk 2.5 minutes or something for a banquet in 96 degrees in high heels or whatever to get to something like that, that's not even feasible. That's why I'm just kind of stunned at some of these, what they're proposing for some of these parking spaces. It's just not realistic, and I think they're setting up the downtown to fail.
Well, so we'll start with each one of them. First of all, these numbers are already adopted in our ordinance. So this is what we've been going on since the downtown standards have been adopted. As far as the shared parking, that would be accomplished through an easement. We're not taking away their private property rights. We're saying, as you redevelop, here's the maximum parking we're going to allow you. You can do more, but it would be through an easement agreement, a joint access agreement, just like if someone were to do a shared parking agreement. We're not saying you can't provide it. We're saying that it has to be open to the public through an agreement. The number of parking spots, I think you will find that I don't see that it's going to be a problem. These aren't unheard of numbers. The townhouse dwelling or apartment where you have 0.1 dwelling unit per visitor, you give them 1.75 for each dwelling unit. So you could have a lot of 1-bedroom apartments, a lot of 2 bedrooms where you don't necessarily have 1.75, but the 0.1 for visitors is overflow. And I think similar to apartments, you have people that work various shifts, various hours. You rarely see a parking lot completely full in an apartment complex.
It's also, I think it's important to remember these are minimums, right? These are not maximums. So if you have in your hypothetical banquet hall, we're not stopping them from having what they feel is the market demand for parking for their facility. We're just not forcing them to have more than what they feel is the market demand there. And if they exceed, the too much by the minimums, it just has to be shared to people when it's not in use. And that's where you think is the problem.
Yeah, well, to the tune of $25,000 a parking space who's going to overbuild a parking garage or whatever parking facility that they have, and then they're forced to, if they choose to overbuild it, then they have to share it.
Yeah, but
I don't understand that.
We talked about this a lot last time too. If you look at like the Trader Joe's down in Winter Park, that developer underbuilt the parking, met the standards, but it's hurt other businesses in that plaza.
Correct. You're setting them up to fail because you can't get parking, and there's no on-street parking on 1792. So where do you go?
But they only really built that place for 2 businesses, and it's what the market will dictate some of this. So no apartment builder, for example, is going to build something today without enough spaces for that they see as appropriate.
I just see more and more people going into, whether it's a unit or a single family home, and they're roommates. So, if you've got a 3-bedroom house, you now have 3 people living in a room. It's not, it's kind of like the Airbnb. You've got people they're going together and renting properties because of the cost of living in the area. So, when you start dividing it out to, it's like a bedroom count is almost more important than the size of the property because of how many people are living in the house.
Not technically, because you would think not all of them have 3, individual or different families. That's not how you would just think of a 3-bedroom.
True. But I'm just saying more and more I'm seeing roommates versus families because of the cost of living. It's actually happening a lot more than you think it is. I don't know that. I just think that some of this parking on these charts is way too restrictive.
What is it? How is it? There's a question, right? How is it restrictive? Because
I mean, it's the proposals are way too
You're
low.
saying too light.
too
Yeah.
too lenient, not too restrictive. It's not requiring enough parking rather than.
Correct. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, okay. It's too lenient on the allowing them to provide less parking than we feel is appropriate.
Yes. I mean, if you think about like going down to Park Avenue, because most of the retail and the restaurants done there are from people who don't live in Winter Park. They've got the train station parking, they've got street parking on both sides of Park Avenue. You've got side street parking, you've got a parking garage. I mean, there's multiple places where you can choose to park.
Mhm.
And I think that, and yes, there's rush hour times and different times of the day when you can go, and it's a different ebb and flow of parking. And I think that's what we're trying to attain or, get to in the downtown Maitland. But again, all of those spots that I just mentioned are public parking places. And I just didn't see that same ebb and flow of that in what is proposed for this.
Well, this doesn't cover the proposed public garages, right? I mean, that happens outside of the land development code. My philosophy on some of that is like the Trader Joe's example. I mean, the reason why that parking lot is so full is because it has tremendously successful businesses in it, right? And same with Park Avenue. I mean, it's very well utilized because you have extremely successful grocery store there, right? Which is very full all the time. That's kind of the dream, right? As opposed to go to Fern Park in my neck of the woods, and you go to the Winn-Dixie parking lot, and gosh darn it, you never have any problem parking there, but the businesses are struggling too, right? It's not from lack of parking, it's because it's not a very pleasant place to be because you have a giant parking lot. That's the struggle, right? I mean,
See,
Well,
to me, Trader Joe's is you can never get a parking space, so businesses have left that facility because you can't get parking.
Yeah, and then Park Avenue is a great example of where you don't hesitate to walk a couple minutes to your destination. And Park Avenue actually has a lot of parking, but people sometimes look too hard for the closest spot versus if you would just go off, off the avenue a block or two, you'd have no problem finding a parking space. I think that's our end goal too, is to resemble that to some degree.
I agree, and that goes back to the walkability. If you require businesses to have all these parking spaces and then they build them, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because it's very unpleasant to cross the sea of pavement to get from one destination to another, or because very expensive. Like I said, as the land value in downtown increases, you're requiring them to spend a tremendous amount of money on parking, and they just won't be able to necessarily do the development otherwise. That's kind of the principle behind it. I mean, it's I think there's a bit of a chicken and the egg where you don't have the demand. I mean, the public structured parking, you don't really have the businesses in place for it and the walkable environment yet, but you won't really have the walkable environment until you have the public garage or excess of public parking. But that is definitely what this code contemplates is that kind of environment with Park Avenue, right? Where you don't mind walking 2 or 3 minutes because it's easy and because you'll have a nice place to walk and nice things to look at as opposed to,
Right.
trotting across a parking lot.
I think 400 North and Lake Lily Village probably have the exact same parking requirements, but the perception of 400 North is because they have a big surface lot it's better and more convenient and you can run in and out to something. But Lake Lily Village has parking. It's just people aren't accustomed to garages.
Well, yeah, and Lake Lily, it's a little harder to find that garage, or people just don't know where it is if
Yeah.
they're not familiar. There's a certain familiarity when you start having structured parking as well. So, but those are things people are able to learn as well.
But one of the best parking spaces at Lake Lily Village is actually back around Lake Lily, past the Civic Center, up into the city lot, and then you just go walk around Lake Lily to get there. But it's that we're not accustomed to that lifestyle very well in Maitland.
Do I need to do this birthday cake just with me and Jackson?
No, you should include all of us.
I don't know. I feel like this is a good discussion. We can carry it on.
So where do our I guess our future plans, did identify these public parking garages, in the area. Yeah, but I think those are all dependent on other structures coming in, or are those any of those that are city driven?
The downtown master plan had a couple parking decks on city-owned property, but there's nothing in the CIP right now that has one under design or construction. But we do have some city-owned lots down here with the intent of doing either surface or structured parking in the future.
And that might be the result of a public-private partnership. Like a developer might come in and want to partner with the city on building that for some of these DICE density bonuses or FAR bonuses. That would be an eligible project, right? So they might partner with the city to build these parking garages and then receive density or FAR bonuses in exchange for that.
And that conversation has already happened. There was I think it was about 3 years ago, there was somebody that was interested in the lot north of the park, and they were talking about doing just that. And, anyway, that they never came in and put in a formal application, but, that is what those areas are located for. And that is consistent with the downtown master plan to have this, park once, walk in and walk to where you want to go, and being able to access parking through there. And the parking is utilized in a far more effective manner as opposed to the surface lot parking lot that's across from Wells Fargo right now, which is completely empty, and and other parking lots that are underutilized as well. Centralizing and making those public parking spaces public makes utilize them in a fashion that is far more effective for land use and allows for more buildings to go in place, like Barrett was saying, so that you increase the walkability through doing that.
The other part of the parking discussion for residential is that, our consultants, one of the first things our consultants pointed out in the assessment phase of our old code was you won't be able to obtain the maximum density in downtown while also providing the number of parking spaces required in our code. So you can kind of have one or the other. You can kind of either have high density walkable neighborhoods, or you can have a high number of required parking, but you can't really have both. And I think that's going to come out in the testing phase. The only reason why I think MCN had to do some kind of how can I put this? creative accounting for their parking and make some kind of deal of reserving parking in future parking lots to get that kind of density. And I don't think you have a parking problem there. I mean, I've never heard of that public portion of that lot being full. So.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of people don't even use the couple stories under of that lot. But they're also not.
Other thoughts on
not
parking? Parking downtown specifically, or other parking standards? I believe everybody has an opinion on parking, and we haven't heard from everybody. But maybe people are tired. We're up 10 minutes to 8:30, which is when we decide to stop. So I think if it's okay with everybody else, my suggestion would be pick up the specific. I think this is an important conversation overall, in general, to have about parking. Think about it and then get into the specifics for the different use types and the standards next time. Does that sound okay to folks?
Works for me.
I think it's a pretty good stopping point. In the last 10 minutes, does anybody have any overall comments, critiques about the process, suggestions?
So they all agreed to meet on the 4th and do more?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
You're gonna put on the agenda.
Okay.
For the 4th.
So it's a consensus to kind of pick this up on the 4th after the public hearing and move on?
I proposed that, but I guess I'd open that if anybody has a strong objection to that.
It sounded like we were would maybe base that decision on what the item is. If it's one that is quick or might take a little longer.
Yeah, if the item got lengthy that was on the agenda.
So we could put it on the agenda and then just decide to cut it short.
Yes.
Whenever you felt, or table it, right? Table it till the next workshop. Are folks, I assume people are still okay with us doing the workshops on the third Thursday of the month, right? So, and doing them over Zoom, is that still the preference?
Mm-hmm.
Works for me.
2.
Our intent is obviously to get through this module and get you the next one. So any P&Z meeting, whether it's a scheduled or alternate one that we don't have cases, we're going to schedule workshops and try to get through this document and on to the next one and then move the project forward.
Yeah, I think you'll see, looking at the overall scale, there was a lot of comments in sections 5.1 and 5.2. I mean, I think these are big, important chapters. We have a lot of comments on the parking standards. And hopefully, I think then we'll start to kind of pick up speed and make progress as we go through some of the later sections in this chapter. So I don't want people to feel, I'm not feeling discouraged about our pace. We got through 22 pages tonight. We already did. They said yes. We did just a few minutes ago. Okay. Can you ask? Because I literally just thought both sounds.
Yeah. All right. So we'll go ahead and get ready to conclude, and we'll pick this up again if the timing is there on Monday or the next P&Z meeting, which is in person in council chambers on February 4th. So assuming that public hearing doesn't go too long or that public workshop doesn't go too long, then we'll pick back up. Otherwise, we'll start scheduling these again every other Thursday on the normal dates. And just wanted to double check, make sure everybody get a consensus whether or not you prefer to do them in council chambers or Zoom, or what you feel from a majority of you guys.
Do you want a straw poll? Like a straw poll? for the 5 members.
I think for these, Zoom makes it slightly more, just a little bit more relaxing and less painful.
Yeah, I thought we just addressed this a minute ago. Are we re-looping?
No, I was actually typing an email to something and I didn't hear it very clearly, or I didn't hear it well, so I wanted to make sure that this is the direction we're going. And we can ask after every meeting in case anybody changes their mind or changes their opinion. But it sounds like the consensus, we've heard from at least 2.
I think we should meet in person because we can't vote on anything not by not being in person, but I know I'm the minority.
Well, I don't think we're voting during the workshop. We're rolling up the vote, aren't we? Voting it. I think that was the intent. Kathleen, are you thinking we should be voting at each segment?
Well, I mean, I know Snow, we can't do anything official by doing it by Zoom now. So as far as anything we would need to address for planning and zoning. So I know we'll be together next on the 4th.
Yeah, every time we have something, the regular meetings where we definitely will meet in person for when there's agenda items other than just the module.
Right.
Are you looking for like a straw poll? Everybody, what do other folks think? Matt, Jamie?
I'm in favor of doing the workshops over Zoom.
Yeah, I am as well. I'll just say for my, given the fact I do my comments electronically, I'm able to review my PDF with my comments. For me, it's just it's more feasible to do via Zoom. And I agree. If we're going to have, part of that was, or part of my perspective around asking the questions around public input was at the beginning of this call was to kind of get an understanding or appreciation of how that would be handled at the end. I mean, I do want to make sure that we have the opportunity to gain public input on this, but given the fact of the way we're going through this, it's probably going to be most applicable and appropriate for that to happen once we have the full document in its entirety and we're going through that second iteration around to the review. So I like the Zoom personally.
Okay, well, we'll do that. Just keep in mind, as you guys have already said, that no decisions or votes can be made in a workshop, which this is just a discussion of the comments at this point. But on the 4th, when we meet for the public workshop, we will be voting on the previous minutes. We'll be voting on a new chair and vice chair. And then, of course, you guys will be given a recommendation to staff on what you hear from the public meeting. But then when we get to the workshop part, technically we're all there in person, so you could make a recommendation, but there's really nothing to recommend at this point. It's still too early in the game. Yeah. Okay, well, folks, think this is a good stopping point. Thanks, everybody. I think this was got a decent chunk of this addressed and good comments.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night. Recording.